Hi friends, it's me, host Derek, host of Talking with Famous People. I'm here with Susie. She's popped in to join me right at the outset of this video, and we're talking maps, metamaps, science, pseudo-science, MBTI, and real chicken flavor. Mix them all together, you got yourself a hearty chicken meal. Susie, any thoughts on that?
What is chicken flavor?
Well, it's when you take a chicken and you squeeze them real hard, you get a few drips of pure chicken flavor out of them. But
It's
that's not
not.
really the topic here. It's really about metamaps because of Zachary's comment sometime back, which I need to try to find now. It's going to be a challenge. But I thought I'd start by just approaching this issue of critiquing critiquing analysis, right? So Zach said I found his comment by searching for the word metamap. Are all maps provisional? Do you think a universal metamap is possible? In other words, does there subsist a standard to unite map and territory that is extraneous to the naive truthfulness of the rules of map construction? Is there a standard? Does there subsist? I don't think he means subsist. I think he means, does there exist a standard to unite map and territory that is extraneous to the naive truthfulness of map construction? Most people analytically minded think an exposition of the rules of map construction satisfies a standard. The rules are the meta language, and the logical analysis has nothing to recourse to but itself. I think the truth of the matter is there can be no analysis of analysis. You can't use the rules of the map and its construction to affirm the relationship of the map and the territory itself. It begs the question. Thus, we always begin with the question of framing. Okay, well, I get what he's saying there. We always begin with the question of framing, that you can't say, look, this map is a good one because it relates to the territory meaningfully, because that definition of what relates to a territory meaningfully is itself a frame of reference that's going to determine legitimization. But that doesn't mean it's not possible to have a metamap. And it doesn't mean that it's not possible to have a singular metamap that subsumes all others, but it is true that that's going to be itself frame contingent. That doesn't render it meaningless or useless. So, there is a difference um, between modalities of legitimization that makes metamapping meaningful. So, for example, one of the reasons why a lot of people don't legitimize MBTI or cognitive functions is because it doesn't falsify according to a certain kind of um, repeatable experimental process empirics, you know? So, but when they try to do this, when psychologists, quote unquote, try to do real science, quote unquote, on psychology, they end up with a big bucket of worms. They say, like, okay, well, it turns out that some people really are more open to new experiences and some people really aren't. Well, fucking duh. I mean, that's not saying anything. That's not telling anybody anything. The fact that you can draw some sort of correlation between, I mean, the fact that you can measure tendencies within a population is not useful information. The thing is, there's it's much more meaningful, I think, to talk about people's personality types in terms of, if you want to try to get it as concrete and empirically based as possible, it would be um, how they legitimize affirmations of statements, and you can determine that, you can test for that kind of stuff, and which kind of statements are going to be legitimized versus which others. Um, the problem is when you get testers who are highly intuitive, then and developed and aware of this stuff, then they start rendering the questions non indicative of what they're testing for, because language is static, language is precise, and people's response to it can be just as static and precise and can interpret out a lot of different possible meanings for things or frames of reference under which it's meant. So it's true that you cannot remove ever the observer from the equation. And it's absolutely true that if you want to have a metamap, it has to account for that. And it's absolutely true that that metamap will itself be an ontological expression of the person who makes the metamap, and its advocacy itself an ontological expression. But that doesn't mean that people's ontologies aren't substantially improved by the ability to map and metamap things. I think that the cognitive function model is the best metamap available because it does successfully subsume your critique. Now, I could make some cheap critiques on your critique that are easier to make, that are easily disputed by simply pointing out that your conclusion, your thought, the truth of the matter, your declaration that the truth of the matter is that there can be no analysis of analysis, is itself an analysis of analysis, belying the claim and therefore invalidating your whole argument. But that's not the point. I don't want to win that way. That's cheap and easy, right? The thing is, I get your general gist of it, which is that you can't get outside of the box and critique it, that analysis of analysis critique that you're making right there is only invalid within the frame of TI, in which it's subject to the laws of non-contradiction. But my metamap, as I present it anyway, accounts for that distinction by pointing out that metaphysical objects exist according to different rules than physical objects, and that's one of the ways in which they're different. I heard somebody in the room yesterday or today say the reason that MBTI isn't treated like the powerful thing it ought to be treated as, or cognitive functions, is because it's a pseudo-science. Well, that gets you down to the framing observer problem. Just because it's demanding that everything go one direction. It's saying, I don't want you to provide an explanation as to why these tendencies clump. I want you to prove they clump first. Well, we know they clump. We know they do. We know that I'm, as a person who's interested in ideating in this fashion and who's rigorous about applying TI logic and consistency as a grammar of the discourse environment, am necessarily not going to also validate just as highly the negation of that. The fact that things are definitionally necessary is a perfectly reasonable reason to conclude something. The fact that things are exclusionary of one another, that I can't both be riding a bicycle and a unicycle at the same time, is something nobody disputes because it violates the law of non-contradiction on a physical plane. The fact that I can't both advocate and affirm a TI framework and an FI framework does not receive the same level of consensus because it's not subject to the law of non-contradiction in the same way that physical elements are. But that doesn't mean that we can't draw definitional conclusions about things. It doesn't mean that, in fact, as our experiential manifestation of that in the moment, in a real-time linear world where time moves forward and not conditionally, that when we express things and advocate them, that they don't constitute actions that sit on the flow in the real world. They do. So in that sense, you're subject to the non-contradiction clause through your own ontological being. Because I'm an individual making claims, I'm subject to contradiction because I can make claims that contradict other claims that I make. It doesn't matter if the claims independently of me themselves might somehow not be subject to the law of non-contradiction as I represent it to be, because no claims are ever made in the absence of an ontological source of those claims. So absolutely, the necessity of an observer as a prerequisite to any reality manifestation or any instantiation of anything is true, and doesn't render the processes of ontology, namely the ability to conceive of oneself and others as comprehensible processes as well as unique particularist blooms of self, is part of it kind of explains why humanity is the way it is. We know from quantum mechanics that there are you can pin down certain things, and the more clearly you got those things pinned down, the less pinned down other corollaries are. We understand that there's this impossibility implicit in the nature of reality that precludes us from knowing a thing from all angles in both across time and in the moment. That there's a time sensitivity to reality that is responsive in that fashion. So it makes perfect sense then that we would be only able to manifest some components of that attentional spectrum in and of ourselves, and that it would require a society that comprises the whole of that attentional spectrum to manifest all attentional varieties of reality. If we want to call reality subject to attentional variety, somebody might object to that. Well, there's no reason to presume that we're in a single shared reality in the first place. It could just as easily be that we're each rendering it separately on our own screens, as it were. And even if it is the case that we are in a shared reality, that only just solidifies the fact that there's a distinction between a physical reality and a metaphysical reality. They're subject to different rules, and that a human ontology is the instantiation of the confluence of those two planes of existence. That human intelligence creates the discursive environment that we sometimes mistake for a imitation of the real environment, but which Zachary points out, though not as elegantly as it might have been pointed out in some sense. We can't ideate our way out of the fact that our ideation is part of our instantiation of self. And we wouldn't want to, and there's nothing wrong with that. The fact that this ideation as an instantiation of myself might prove to be a tool that allows you to instantiate self in more personally satisfying ways, or ways that feel more resonant with the truth of the external world to you, well, that just proves it's fun and good, not that it's impossible. We can look at it from a teleological perspective, Zachary, and we can conclude it must exist and it must be doing something because impact can be noted. So, I mean, did we construct the impact causal relationship? Maybe, but it doesn't matter because it's attributed nevertheless. Susie, thoughts?
Not really. That's a lot of blah.
A lot of fancy talk? A lot of fancy talk
Yeah,
signifying nothing?
a lot of talk about not a lot.
Right, well, I get his point, though. It's like there's a resistance, an attempt by a lot of people, it seemed to me, to find the one right and correct interpretation of, say, cognitive functions that best represents the actual relationship between attentional modalities within an individual. So it's true that certain kinds of attention preclude other kinds of attention happening concurrently. And it's true, it would seem to me indisputably, that certain individuals habituate their expression of self through certain attentional patterns much more frequently than others. So it's like once you acknowledge those basic facts that most people who act the way they act the way they act most of the time, but not all of the time, it's like everything else
Okay.
logically follows.
Yeah, but you know that guy Dario Nardi with the brain scans?
Yeah?
Well, ways of using the brain seems to correlate with type.
Right. I mean, I know they're supporting empirics, but my approach to this is always not to say, no, but there are empirics. My approach is always to say, your fixation with empirics is the problem. Because it doesn't gain more validity by having those empirics in my mind. To me, I don't need a brain scan to prove to me that paying attention one way is different than paying attention a different way. I mean, I know that I am functioning differently as a consciousness when I'm sleeping, for example, than when I'm awake. I don't need a brain scan to tell me that.
Okay, but let's go far away from everything. Let's say it has no validity at all. And You choose to learn about it because you experience it as something you personally see as useful in interacting with other people. And even if it's right or not, if that makes you more secure in communications with others, it did have a purpose. Even if it's fake, if it looks like it's working, it had some value.
Right. To insist that something like this is pseudoscientific, I mean, here's the thing. You can the corollary then the comparison people are going to make is between uh, what's it called, astrology and MBTI. They're going to say, well, if it then why not just talk about astrology? That's equally useful, right? If I find it useful, if that's the standard I'm using to determine the validity of something, utility to the self, then everything's valid if I find it useful. So I think the answer to that is
And if the reasoning come from a place of the person not understanding it, then it has no value to that person anyway.
right. I mean, it's a tricky question because I don't want to make simply a teleological argument that it's purposeful, that it's purposed, and therefore it is what it is, and it is what it claims to be. I'd point out the fact that there's a big difference between parsing out a set of existent behavior and ascribing relational statuses to those sets of behavior or attention, um, and then noting necessary counter relational truths about certain kinds of manners of attention and valuings of things. It's very, very different indeed than saying you're more likely to be this type because you were born on this day. It's not comparable at all because the former is making claims about, he's making predictions about, from one fact to a whole set of facts. And that's where people misunderstand cognitive functions. They think that cognitive functions are about picking a type and then predicting how you're going to be or something. But it's not that at all. It's understanding yourself as a habit of, as an ongoing process of habitually preferring some kinds of ways of paying attention over other kinds of ways of paying attention. And the fact that those ways of paying attention relate to each other in that kind of exclusionary, proportional, inverse proportional, supporting, or complementary or contradictory ways is also indisputable. It's not like anybody can meaningfully dispute it because if I'm prioritizing something that's exclusive of another way of prioritizing, and I can only use one criterion because time is linear and we don't have multiple options to try it multiple ways often, it's necessarily the case that everybody agrees before we even begin discussion that certain manners of valuing or certain manners of paying attention are related in some fashion, like in terms of structural architecture of grammar of existence, to others. It's not disputable. It would be insane to try to dispute it. If you want to try to dispute it, focus on doing some math problems, and I'll come over and start asking you questions about your kids and stuff like that. And we'll see if you can do it just as fast while answering my questions as well not answering my questions. If you can't do it just as fast while not answering my questions, then you're having to split your attention in some fashion, which shows that attentions cannot all be done concurrently at equal effectiveness, or, in other words, to attain a given outcome in the same amount of time. Time is the never-ending factor that must be considered when objectively representing things like this. Time moves forward. It renders things that are conditional in and of themselves into causal when people instantiate them through their own existence. So, yeah. That's what I have to say about all of that stuff. It's a good comment though, Zachary. I like it when we get so abstract that basically you got a big video that goes, "Yeah, I can give reasons for things." That's what this video says. "Yeah, I can. Yeah, my reasons are better than other people's." And yeah, it matters. The end.
Yeah. And your reasons matter more than my reasons because you don't like my reasons.
Right. Yeah. Your reasons are dumb and my reasons are cool. Okay? That's
Okay,
the gist of this
that's your
video.
way of paying attention.
Yeah, that's my way of paying attention to your comment. That's a good comment, Zachary. You always intrigue me. When you periodically show up, I go, because it represents to me history, like it's got some meat to the whole thing because it's got history, it's got reference points like that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.
Wait.
Go
Before
ahead.
it's too late. What
Go
video
ahead,
is this?
Kato.
What video is this? I want to chime in, even if I have nothing to say.
We're talking about mapping, metamapping, science, pseudoscience, cognitive functions, and astrology, amongst other things.
Oh shit! I feel like that's too deep.
Kato, should we ignore cognitive functions because it's just pseudoscience?
I mean, it's not. It's real.
It's real.
Mhm.
So is there a little TI in the middle of my brain? Can we locate it and say, there's your TI?
I believe so.
Oh. Is it an object, like a rock?
I mean, it's the same thing as an apple. An apple. I mean, you can say objectively what it is, but at the same time, it is subjective. It is crunchy. Everyone would agree that it's crunchy, but there's no metric to say that it's crunchy. But we all know that apples are crunchy versus oranges, and that's a subjective metric, but we all agree on it. So in that same regard, we don't have a tangible thing for cognitive functions, but they're very real in that aspect. It's a taxonomy. It's a way of classifying.
So cognitive function is a name for a category thing, like apple's a name for a category thing. And while it does refer to specific instances of things that fit into that general category, the mistake that we make is to mistake the category name and its failure to be absolutely distinct and uniquely particular in its instantiation for the fact that because it's an object, it can't be that. It only represents individuals that are that as a class.
Yeah. And boxes and groups. People like to be identified with boxes and groups.
Right. Like me, I'm transracial. I'm also transgender, traveling between the range of manly and supermanly. And those are my identities. I love those boxes. Those are boxes that I'm in. I'm also a God-fearing atheist. It's an important box to be in. Not a lot of us in that box, but there are a few.
So you're an atheist that's afraid of
God.
religion being true?
I'm just terrified of God. I don't worry about religion. I skip straight to the chase. I'm an ardent atheist, but secretly I know God exists, so I'm afraid he's going to strike me down at any minute. It's a tough role to play in life, I tell you.
Like, go ahead, strike me down, and you live in fear.
I watched this show the other day, last night actually, about this church called something Agape Church or whatever. And what they do is they cast demons out of all of their parishioners. But the way they cast demons out of them, they shout Christian stuff at them, and then they start coughing up phlegm into a bag. And so this church, when they're casting out the demons, they pass out paper towels and bags to spit into and stuff. And it turns out that the demons are in your phlegm. That's where they hang out, I guess. So if you're phlegmy, that means God hates you.
If you have germs, God hates you.
Allergies are just another way of saying you're dancing with the devil, friend. Okay? Keep that in mind. If you are allergic to cats, don't have any cats. Otherwise, you're opening a door that will allow demons to take possession of you.
Yeah, and if you're allergic to demons, don't have any germs.
if you are allergic to demons, now that's an interesting one. I think in the case you are allergic to demons, they don't manifest in your phlegm, but rather just in your saliva. I think that's the main difference. And they're not nearly as dangerous there. So being allergic to demons is a good thing. But oddly, it often comes with a corresponding allergy to holy water. You wouldn't expect that. It's totally counterintuitive, but it's true. People who are allergic to demons, the actual source allergy is likely to be allergic to theology in general, hence the corresponding holy water allergy. Well, that's it today for Catholic Allergies and You. Thanks for tuning in to our weekly podcast on how demons and allergies link to one another. Talk to y'all later.